Here's a deep dive on why Rikers Island is being shut down, the forces behind the decision, the reform plan, the problems that got it there, and what the looming challenges are. Because you like detail, emotional stakes, and layered context, we'll explore with a narrative lens. This isn't just infrastructure. It's a story of justice, failure, reform, and hope. They called it the Island of No Return. For decades, Rikers Island stood as a symbol of everything broken in America's justice system: violence, corruption, and the kind of suffering the city tried to forget. But now it's coming to an end. The city has vowed to shut it down, to erase one of the darkest chapters in New York's history. Yet behind the so-called closure lies a story far more complicated and far more dangerous. Before we dive in, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see Rikers Island forever. The island that time forgot. Rikers Island was never meant to last this long. Built in the 1930s on landfill and dreams of modern correction, it grew into a city of its own. 10 jails for 100 acres, and a daily population once topping 20,000. But over time, the island became something else, a symbol of everything broken in New York's justice system. Cells crumbling, guards overworked, violence routine. Here, justice didn't feel like a system. It felt like survival. For decades, reports of abuse, neglect, and cover-ups piled higher than the walls themselves. And while politicians promised change, nothing ever changed. It sits in the East River like a scar, a strip of land built on the city's garbage, now buried beneath decades of human misery. Rikers Island wasn't designed to last this long. When it opened in the 1930s, officials called it a modern solution. But modern turned to medieval faster than anyone could imagine. Sound, dripping water echo, slow metal creak. What began as a single facility became a city behind bars. 10 jails, thousands of inmates, and a world cut off from the one it was meant to serve. The skyline of Manhattan is visible just beyond the razor wire, close enough to see, but too far to reach. Inside, time moves differently. Days stretch into weeks. Weeks blur into years. And for those trapped here, Rikers became more than a jail. It became a memory loop of violence, silence, and survival. They called it the island that time forgot. Because nothing ever seemed to change. The paint peeled. The walls cracked. But the suffering stayed the same. The culture of violence. Inside Rikers, violence wasn't random, it was routine. Officers called it the program. A system where inmate enforced order through fear. If you stepped out of line, you paid. Reports revealed entire cell blocks where beatings were staged off-camera, where solitary confinement lasted months, and where mental health units turned into torture chambers. For many detainees not convicted, just awaiting trial, Rikers became a slow-motion sentence before the verdict was even read. This is what pushed the city to the edge. Not just bad management, but a moral collapse. Violence wasn't an accident on Rikers Island. It was a language everyone understood. Guards spoke it. Inmates lived by it, and survival depended on how fluently you could respond. Inside these walls, a brutal system ruled. Officers called it the program, an unspoken pact where certain inmates were given control to keep order. They beat others into submission, while guards looked the other way. The message was clear: obey or disappear. New arrivals learned fast. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact. Trust no one. Friendships were currency, silence was armor, and fear was law. Official reports described it as a culture of violence. But to the people living here, it wasn't culture, it was instinct. Every sound, every shadow, every second could decide whether you'd make it to morning. And the most chilling truth? Most of the people trapped inside hadn't even been convicted yet. They were still waiting for a trial that might never come. The call for reform. By the 2010s, the pressure was impossible to ignore. A federal monitor took control. Civil rights lawsuits stacked up, and public outrage exploded after a series of deaths and scandals that shook the city to its core. Mayor Bill de Blasio made the announcement in 2019. Rikers Island would close permanently by 2027. The crowd cheered, but the reality was far from simple. Behind the scenes, architects, city planners, and correctional officials drafted a new vision: smaller, borough-based jails, one in each borough except Staten Island. Closer to families, courts, and communities. Safer, cleaner, more humane. At least that was the plan. For decades, the island's walls kept more than inmates locked away. They kept the truth from escaping. But by the 2010s, the voices grew too loud to ignore. Families who'd lost sons and daughters to the island's neglect began to speak out. Advocates, journalists, even former guards stepped forward with stories that shattered the illusion of control. Sound. Crowd chant grows louder, megaphone echoes. They called it Close Rikers, not just a protest, but a movement, a demand for justice in a system that had long forgotten what that word meant. Images of abuse and cover-ups hit the headlines. Court documents revealed years of hidden deaths, forged reports, and silence from the top. New York was forced to face a question it had avoided for decades. How much longer can a city claim to care about justice? While Rikers still stands. Beat, sound of camera clicks, fading to somber piano. In 2019, under relentless public pressure, Mayor Bill de Blasio made the announcement that changed everything. Rikers Island would close permanently by 2027. For the families, it was more than a policy shift. It was a victory carved from pain. But as history would show, promises are easy. Change never is. The plan to replace Rikers. The city promised modern justice. New facilities with natural light, education programs, and medical wings. A system that treats people with dignity, not despair. But the plan came with a staggering price tag, billions of dollars in construction costs and years of delays. And critics asked a painful question. How do you rebuild a system that's already rotten at its core? Even with new walls, new staff, new architecture, would the same old culture just move to a new address? When the announcement finally came, it sounded like the dawn of a new era. The mayor's voice echoed through City Hall. Rikers Island will close, and in its place, a modern system will rise. For a moment, it felt like hope. Blueprints were unveiled. Glossy renders flashed across screens. Glass-fronted buildings, open spaces, classrooms, therapy rooms, and sunlit cells. It wasn't a jail anymore, they said. It was a justice center. For new borough-based facilities would replace the island. Smaller, safer, closer to courts and families. A system built not on fear, but on proximity, on human connection. But behind the headlines lay questions the renders didn't answer. Would new walls really end old habits? Could architecture alone change a culture of brutality? And what happens when you build a new system on top of the same broken foundation? The city called it the future of justice. But for the people who'd lived through Rikers, it felt like history repeating with better lighting. The politics behind the promise. The closure of Rikers became a political battlefield. Some city leaders supported it as the dawn of reform. Others saw it as reckless. Or worse, a PR move hiding the same failures. Mayor Eric Adams, while backing closure, warned the city wasn't ready. Population numbers were still too high. Courts were clogged, and some neighborhoods fought new jail construction, calling it hypocrisy, demanding reform but rejecting jails near their homes. Meanwhile, the clock ticked toward 2027, and reality lagged behind rhetoric. The plan to close Rikers sounded simple, until politics got involved. Inside City Hall, support fractured as fast as it formed. Some council members called it a moral victory. Others saw it as reckless, an illusion of progress with no real solution. Mayor Eric Adams backed the closure, but warned the city wasn't ready. The jail population was rising again, court delays stacked up, and officers were burning out. If we close Rikers now, he said, we'll just move chaos somewhere else. Meanwhile, the same lawmakers demanding reform fought against new jail construction in their own districts. Not here, they said. Build it somewhere else. The mayor called them hypocrites. The headlines called it politics as usual. Behind closed doors, the debate wasn't just about buildings. It was about image. Who gets the credit, who gets the blame, and who dares to tell the truth. The promise of a better system became a political chessboard. And while they argued over funding, the violence at Rikers continued, day after day, out of sight and out of mind. The human cost. To understand why Rikers must close, You have to see the people trapped in its shadow. 85% of its population were pretrial detainees, legally innocent. Most came from poor neighborhoods, many struggling with addiction or mental illness. Some never made it to trial. Their names became hashtags, their stories symbols of what went wrong. For their families, the closure isn't political, it's personal. They're not asking for vengeance. They're asking for dignity. Beyond the politics, beyond the press conferences, they're the lives, the ones who never made a home. Every cell, every headline, every promise hides a story with a name. A mother waiting by the phone that never rings. A father holding on to hope long after the courts forgot his son existed. A teenager who came to Rikers for a misdemeanor and never walked out. More than 85% of people on Rikers were never convicted of a crime. They were detainees, legally innocent, still waiting for a trial that could take years. But time moves differently here. Days feel like months. And in that waiting, some break. Others vanish. Families travel hours just to see their loved ones for 15 minutes behind glass. They bring letters, money for commissary, and prayers that don't always reach. For them, the closure of Rikers isn't about politics. It's about pain. They're not asking for sympathy. They're asking for dignity. Because for every politician promising reform, there's a mother lighting a candle for a name the city no longer remembers. The crisis continues. Even as closure plans move forward, Rikers remains open and deadly. Reports in 2025 describe rising violence, collapsing infrastructure, and suicides at record highs. A federal judge finally intervened, threatening to place the jail under receivership, federal control. That decision alone tells you everything. New York can no longer be trusted to run its own jail. And yet, despite court orders and outrage, the island stays open, a machine that refuses to die. Even as the city planned its future, the island was breaking apart in the present. New reports surfaced, more violence, more deaths, more chaos. Cells flooded, fires set, guards quitting faster than replacements could be trained. Inside Rikers, the word reform sounded like a cruel joke. By 2025, the situation had reached a point of no return. A federal judge declared what the city refused to admit, that New York had lost control of its own jail. Receivership was coming. Federal oversight, the last resort when a system collapses. The numbers told their own story. Assaults at record highs, suicides climbing, morale near zero. But behind those statistics were faces, men and women trapped in a place the government had already promised to close. They called Rikers the island that time forgot. Now, time itself was fighting back, turning the island into a headline, a warning, a countdown, the obstacles. The truth is, closing Rikers isn't just about shutting doors. It's about tearing down an entire ecosystem built on bureaucracy, union power, and political compromise. Every piece of the plan, from construction permits to staffing levels, has been fought in court, in City Hall, and in the streets. The population hasn't fallen fast enough. The money keeps growing. And 2027 now looks more like a dream than a deadline. Every promise has a price. And for Rikers Island, the price of closure kept climbing. The city's plan was simple on paper, but on the ground, it was buried under layers of bureaucracy, lawsuits, and political hesitation. Construction delays, budget overruns, and endless public hearings turned progress into paralysis. Every blueprint had to pass through committees. Every permit met resistance. The new jails, meant to open by 2027, still existed mostly as renderings and red tape. Meanwhile, the population inside Rikers refused to drop. Judges kept setting bail too high. Court backlogs stretched for months. And every delay outside the island meant more lives trapped within it. Critics began calling it the illusion of reform. Billions spent, headlines written, but little changed. Even the workers on the ground whispered the same question. Will Rikers ever really close? Because sometimes the hardest walls to tear down aren't made of concrete. They're built from paperwork, politics, and fear. The future of the island. When Rikers finally closes, the city plans to transform the island into something new, a green energy hub perhaps, or a memorial to the past. But can you ever truly erase what happened here? Every cell, every corridor, every scream left an imprint. This island carries the weight of thousands of lives. Stories that deserve more than silence. For nearly a century, Rikers Island has been defined by what it contained: walls, wire, and the weight of human failure. But one day, those walls will fall. And when they do, the question won't be what we lost, but what we create next. The city plans to remake the island, transform it into something cleaner, greener, alive. A renewable energy hub. Maybe a memorial to the men and women who suffered here. A chance to turn a wound into a warning. Yet the ghosts of Rikers won't disappear so easily. Every corridor holds memories. Every echo remembers a name. Reformers call it rebirth. Survivors call it unfinished business. And maybe they're both right, because healing doesn't come with demolition. It comes with remembrance. Someday, the gates will rust, the buildings crumble, and grass will overtake the concrete. But if this island is to mean anything again, it must stand as proof that the cost of forgetting is always too high. The ghosts of Rikers. For nearly a century, Rikers Island has haunted New York. It stood as a mirror, showing the city what it refused to see: poverty, neglect, inequality. Now, as bulldozers prepare to erase the past, we have to ask, are we fixing the system or just hiding the evidence? At night, when the ferries stop running and the city goes quiet, the island breathes. The wind moves through broken windows. Chains sway in empty corridors. And somewhere, beneath the hum of old lights, you can almost hear the voices. The men and women who once called this place home, or hell. They say every place remembers what it held. And Rikers remembers everything. The footsteps of officers who worked double shifts. The prayers whispered in solitary cells. The screams no one answered. And the silence that swallowed them all. The city calls it progress. The politicians call it reform. But for those who lived it, Rikers isn't a headline. It's a ghost story. Even when the last door shuts and the lights go out, the island won't disappear. It will wait beneath the skyline, a monument to what happens when justice forgets mercy. Because the ghosts of Rikers don't haunt the island. They haunt us. One day, the gates of Rikers will close for the last time. The ferries will stop. The cells will go dark. But the memory will remain, a reminder that justice isn't about punishment. It's about humanity. If this story moved you, share, and subscribe, because the truth deserves to be seen, not buried. And as the tide rises around the island, remember this. Some walls don't fall easily, but when they finally do, the sound echoes forever.